Dear viewers, welcome to a new episode of our program Weaving the Future. In today's episode, we will speak with Nalini Nayak, who is a women activist from southern India who has been struggling for ecology and for the rights of women and workers for over 40 years. Nalini joined a delegation from Indian women to Northern Kurdistan at the beginning of this year. And among other places, she also went to the Newroz celebrations in Ahmed. So today we want to ask Nalini to share her experiences from her journey to Kurdistan with us. And we also want to ask her to share the experiences that she has gathered in the struggle in India with us. So without further ado, we will start the interview now. So first of all, welcome Nalini to our interview today.
Thank you.
So could you first please shortly introduce yourself and your works?
Okay, as you said, my name is Nalini and I come from South India. I work in Kerala, which is the extreme south of India. And I've been working a long time with coastal communities and with women in the informal sector. So that's my major background. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And then our first question would be regarding your recent delegation, where you joined a delegation to Northern Kurdistan at the beginning of this year. And I would like to ask you what your reflections are on your journey to Kurdistan.
Okay. Yeah. So, this was a great privilege actually to have had this opportunity to visit Kurdistan, Northern Kurdistan. And that happened because we had met the delegation, the Kurdish delegation that has been in India for the last couple of years, who had informed us about the struggle of the Kurdish people. I must say that, there are no Kurdish diaspora in South Asia. So we don't get much news about the Kurdish struggle here. We do know that the Kurds have been a people who've been really marginalized, ostracized, and therefore there has been this reaction and their resistance. But I didn't know much more until I met the Kurdish delegation in India. And then they introduced us to the books of Abdullah Öcalan. And some of us read this book, his third volume on the sociology of freedom, which was very impressive because many of us who belong to the left movement in India have been very influenced by Marxist approach and analysis. And but we've also seen its shortcomings. And so reading Abdullah Öcalan's book was extremely heartwarming in the sense that it helped us to see and give us a wider vision of a society that is possible. Because from our understanding, the Marxist analysis did not include the ecological issues and the issues of women's marginalization to that extent as Abdullah Öcalan has built up. So when we heard that on one occasion, the Kurdish friends here told us that they celebrate, their big festival is the Newroz. So I got a surprise. I said, how come Kurdish people celebrate Newroz? That's the celebration of the Parsi people in India. And then they said, yeah, but don't you know, they come from Zoroastrian, they are the Zoroastrian communities that were also ousted many years ago from our region. And so we have the same history. So this was very intriguing for me. And then we thought, they said, why don't you come to Kurdistan during the Newroz? And that's how a few of us decided to go. And only three of us women actually reached there. And it was a great honor because we were the guests of the Kurdish women's movement. And they really took great care of us while we were there. And so it started with the celebrations at Newroz, which was very special to see people celebrating the history of freedom in a context where they are not free. and that they are not free was very visible to us because of the kind of police protection and the security checks that we went through before entering that space. And then we noticed how young people were carrying banners and posters of people who obviously had either died in the movement or were taken away to prison or have just disappeared. And they were shouting their slogans. And of course, the celebration was quite emotional in a sense. What really surprised us were these big posters, where there was this Jin Azadi written. Those were the main posters in the whole celebration. And then we noticed the way the celebration was organized was always one man, one woman who were, comparing the entire celebration. And there was no kind of main guest or chief guest like we would see in our country. And so it was really a people celebration, and delegations from all different groups spoke, and we were getting translations so we could listen to what they were saying. And then we understood that most of these people had been in prison for a long time, and the woman who actually read the message of Ocalan at this celebration was just released 2 months prior to this, and she was so emotional in the way she read. So we wondered why she was so emotional, only later to hear that, she was the woman who had been most tortured during her imprisonment, and now she had been released. So for us, it was painful to understand that people living an ordinary life, living a life in what they believed was important, have just been put in prison at any time. And as we spent the next 8 days there, we experienced this even more because almost 90% of the people we met had all been in prison at some time or the other, even if they were elected representatives. So for us, that people could so easily be put in prison was something very surprising. Of course, I must say that that process has started in India now, since the last 5 years or a little more. But before that, we hadn't seen that people could be so easily put in prison without having a case sheet or any case against them. But so we saw this and we were very surprised. Nevertheless, what the women's movement had organized a program for us there, and it was very special that they gave us a feel of all the levels of governance and the way women have taken their space and in the whole governance system. And this was very impressive to see how the idea of the co-chair has been established everywhere, and how the co-chairs take their responsibility. So for us, this was all quite impressive, although we do have, in some parts, like in our state, we do have a 50% representation of women in governance. But not to the extent, we don't have the concept of the co-chair. So the hierarchies are still very established, and which we found are not so in the areas that we visited. It's far more democratic. And the fact that there is a women's assembly created in each municipality from where women representatives are elected was very special. So I think most of these aspects of how women have taken their space, how women have visibilized themselves and their roles in society was very impressive. Then we were taken to certain municipalities where women have recreated, their the ability for young children to speak again the Kurdish language to learn Kurdish culture. The libraries, some of them have created their libraries, others have created their ecological parks. Then there are some municipalities with their archaeological museums of all the traditional archaeological, their traditional equipment in agriculture, which is kind of mainly forgotten in the big cities. And so they are giving the opportunity for the urban people to see what the agriculture was like, reviving seeds, the traditional seeds, and trying to keep alive their food systems. So all this was very impressive that they do it through the municipality. It was more impressive for us because what we saw around was a more modern capitalist society, as you see in urban areas, because we saw, look, we spent only 8 days there. So we cannot say that we got to know truly the life of the common people, because we spent a lot of time meeting people in governance. So the information we have may also be quite limited. But with the seeing with our Indian eyes, there were things that struck us as being very special, and also things which struck us being very different. Because in our areas, and of course in the work that I do, I interact a lot more with traditional rural people who earn their livelihood from their traditional crafts, and of which we did not see too much. We did not also see too much small agricultural farms. We know they exist, but we did not visit them because we were not in those areas. So, so for us, there was a slight difference from that point of view. But on the other hand, I must say, what we saw was extremely impressive. The other aspects that we were exposed to during the visit were, the cultural organization, which was Kasid, of the women's cultural place where the artists, the dancers, the musicians all gather and create their own music and their understanding of the Kurdish culture and Kurdish language, which I found very interesting. And then we visited also the Genealogy Academy, where we understood from those women how they tried to help in this whole process of women taking responsibility, women understanding the importance of their role in society, and how they have been translating a lot of Öcalan's writings for larger groups of women. So, and they too have been researching a lot of the old traditions of women in Kurdish society, which I found extremely interesting. Then we also met the Rosa group, which is a group of women who meet the needs of women who face violence in the family, in their society. And now, of course, this was a surprise to us because we understood that there's still a lot of violence within the household and a lot of issues that women have to face. And it's the Rosa group that meet these women not only for the violence within the family, but in the community as well. And all these women volunteer their time to solve issues of other women. So that was the Rosa group. And then we met the Peace Mothers, which was a real, very touching experience for us, because here were women who have lost their child, their husband, or somebody in the struggle, and yet they support each other because they say, we want peace and we don't want war, and we don't want others to lose their loved ones. And they sing the most beautiful songs which keep up their own spirit, and also encourage each other to support the kind of harassment that they face every day. it was these mothers who told us that on the day of Navroz, all those young people who had held up posters of people who were lost or couldn't be found or who had been killed, they had all been taken to jail that night. 100 people were put in jail, and they tell us that they cannot sleep in peace because they never know when the police will come and knock at their door and violently search the place and take whoever they want. So this was very painful to hear, but yet it's these women who support each other and keep that spirit to say, we are doing it because of our own uh, futures, of the future that we want, the liberated, free future that we are living for. So these were all very impressive. And the other thing that struck us while we were there, where the person who was in charge of our visit was a woman who was an ex-mayor. So she was a very important person in the Kurdish field, in the political field, in the social field. But she was so humble and she was so unassuming and so kind with us. Uh, and we also noticed on the day of Navroz, when there was a dinner for all the visitors who were there, and we were also there. Uh, there sat with us a gentleman, and who talked with us about the Kurdish struggle, and we had a lot of interaction with him. And only later we realized that he was one of their oldest politicians, and he had many cases in his name, but he was so unassuming, he was very free. Now, we wouldn't find these kinds of politicians, members of parliament, being so simple in India, for instance. So when we discussed this with some of our translators, we said, we find your political people are so humble. They are so unassuming. So he said, yes, but we have elected them. So they have to be that way with us. So it was true, but it's a very different understanding of a power structure that we saw there and what we see in our country. Because in our country, when somebody is elected to power, they lose touch completely with the base. And, it looks like we who have elected them, then we have to go and touch their feet if we need anything. It's not as if they are going to reach out to us. So this was very impressive. The way people understand power and the role, their roles when they get elected to a position, and their responsibility towards the people who have elected them. So I just wanted to also share this because all these things impressed us a lot.
Yes, thank you a lot. Then I was also wondering, because I think you also went to Amara, the birth village of Abdullah Öcalan.
Yes.
If you could tell us a bit about your visit there, like who you met and what kind of an atmosphere it was.
Oh, yes. We were so happy that Chalas took us there. We were quite a few of us who went, and she did two things that day. In the morning, we visited that very ancient archaeological site called Gobeli Tepe, and it was very impressive to see this very, very ancient civilization which was in that area, in that whole Mediterranean basin. So, from where civilization actually grew. So, she took us there first. And then we went to Ochran's home village, where we met his brother and his nephew and the people around the village. And it was very interesting, inspiring, because his brother had just gone to see him a few days before because it was Navroz. So this year, his brother was allowed to go, And actually, in all these 26 years, it was only the fourth time that the family had was allowed to even visit him. So he told us that he's in good spirit. He's very hopeful that something will happen, that some change will come. And actually, they were hoping that something good would happen on that Navroz. But they didn't. It didn't happen. But then a few days later, it was going to be Ochalan's birthday. And so we saw his own home where he had actually where he was born and where he lived with his mother, and they had repainted the place. And so they took us in, and there was a photo of Ochalan there. And it was very beautiful because there, the girl who had accompanied us was a very good singer. And so we asked her, please sing one of these freedom songs and let us celebrate and remember him here. So it was very touching because she sang in Kurdish, and all the people from the village and his brother were all there, and we sang and remembered him. And then we told his brother, because he said, come back soon. And then we said, we'll come when he comes back. So we'll definitely come when he comes back. So it was very emotional for us to see that this area where he lived, and it's not far away from where the forest is actually. So it was quite emotional.
And then you also have like decades of experience with like organizing people, and especially with organizing women, also working women. And I would like to ask you, what are parts of your experience that you would like to share with the movement in Kurdistan?
Okay. As I said in the introduction, I've worked with coastal communities, that is, people who live near the ocean, and communities, and then informal women workers. Now, from the coastal communities, I must say, I originally come from an urban area, and I went to this community when just after my university studies, and and which is a long time ago, of course. So I must say that for me, even though I was supposed to be an educated person, uh, I had to learn to live, uh, really live life from this fishing community, because they lived at a very different level from what I had lived in the urban area. So, for instance, I did not know how to light a fire and cook my food. I didn't know how to draw water from a well. So I had to learn from them. So you see, I had to really unlearn all what I had learned in the university, from the community. So that was the first thing. Then for me, it was to learn from them how they actually produce their food. For me, an urbanite, I didn't know anything about growing my food. But here was a community who just went out into the open sea and were able to catch fish. And a lot of fish in those days. I'm talking about 60 years ago, which was a lot of fish. And the fact that they had no devices, not even a compass to tell them how you came back from the place that you started after being on the wide open sea, was a science that they had developed over the years, knowing how to read the sky and come back to from where they went, which for me was a mystery. So it taught me and the couple of us who lived in this community subsequently that these traditional people had a deep understanding of nature. They knew how to find their way in the wild, and they knew how to respect the wild to get their food, only to take what they needed and not for anything more. In the initial phase, for me, it was, brought up in an urban area. You would think that, you had to save money or you needed money to live. But here, you needed skill to produce your food. And because you produced your food, you got money. And with the excess, because you took the excess to the market, but for the rest, you had a livelihood. So for me, in those years, I felt like a parasite, coming from a city. And I think this was a big education for me. And what I learned from the fishing community, all my environmental science, I actually learned from the fishing community. So, because they taught me what it means, what does sustainability mean? It's not in the head, but it's the way you live, the way you interact with the resources, and how you are able to share those resources among so many. So, I will say I learned it from there, and that's the reason why Ochlan's book is so, it touches me deeply, because he writes about these things. He writes about the traditional communities and all that they know, and how are we going to be able to sustain these local, what he would call the confederal system, where people grow their own food and are able to make their own decisions. So I learned this in these communities. And it is from there that we started helping them organize against the exploitative system in which they lived. Because they didn't imagine that, they didn't even realize how they were going to be exploited by the market system and by the technologies that were coming in. So that was a link we were able to make with them when we helped them build their cooperative societies, so that as larger groups, they would be able to retain their own incomes. So, to that extent, I must say, we had a lot of success. And that went on for several years subsequently. Where I think we failed in our work, and for which I think, uh, you know, people in Kurdistan should also be aware, is that there's a way to manage the environment, because if you when we talk about sustainability, it's all about a way of life that we are also talking about. Now, you can't have modernity, um, uh, in on the one side, and sustainability on the other, because at certain points they contradict a lot, because of the way modernity has progressed. So I think at these levels we need to have a lot of discussion about what is modernity, because Ocalan does speak about modernity, and but I don't know how he sees the society today, the modern society today, where people are actually losing skills in order to survive. Now, in India, what we have been trying to do, because we're still such a large, as you know, country, and 80%, 90% of our labor is still in the informal sector, and 60% in very traditional employments. So when people are in traditional employments, they still have skills which you lose when you get into modern education systems. So, how do we keep those skills of agriculture, of fishing, of textile, of pottery, all those skills? How do we keep them alive? And how do we, with those skills, then sustain our economy? So, the understanding of work itself, what is work? Is it to sit at a computer and live in a virtual world? Or is it to sit with the land and see how rich this land is, and what the land gives us of its own richness, and what we take from it. How do we exploit it? Today we are in a very extractive manner, using the land, the soil, the resources. So is it through an extractive culture that modernity is built, or is it in a sustainable culture that modernity of community is built? So I think these are big issues that we are also trying to understand in our own country, and where there have been, for us in the system in which I work, for instance, with the informal women workers, even with the women workers who are in all kinds of trades, there also we try to build collectives or cooperatives or little companies which women themselves manage. And within those systems, how they understand a sharing and a caring philosophy of how you share your resources. It's not easy, but where women realize that it's meaningful, then they are able to sustain it. But what our big issues, of course, in this work is to fight against a state which is very exploitative, because the state believes in a capitalist system which is built on extracting resources. Now, so the conflict for us is people's movements and people's enterprises against a state which has a completely different understanding of growth and development and modernity. So I think that in your reality, or the reality of Kurdistan, in also the context of the state which is within a capitalist system, how you build these democratic, how this confederalism, as Ocalan calls it, is something that will, uh, I'm sure, take time. It's true that the Rojava experiment is a lot talked about, and we are very impressed by what we read. And it's wonderful that, this year Ocalan asks that the negotiation at a larger level can take place, so that through the negotiation, something is able to develop, vis-a-vis an understanding of how a society can be built on more just terms. So I think there's a lot that we can share from India with Kurdish women, because of the kind of context that Indian workers and Indian people are in today. uh, as we read from the history of what happened in the time of Ataturk, where he believed in modernization and large scale industrial agriculture. We didn't have that as early as it happened in your part of the world, in the Midwestern region. Our modernization comes much later, but where there are already a lot of people struggles to say no, we won't give away our land, we won't give you our forest. So there have been struggles, huge struggles of this kind, and those struggles still go on in India, where people say no, we will not let you touch, come and mine in our forest. But that is a huge struggle of how people try to build that solidarity to say no. And now the state is getting far more militarized. And when that happens, it's less easy for the movements to survive. And as I said, now in the past 8 or 10 years, governments have gotten far more autocratic. And in India too, the kind of freedoms we had 30, 20 years ago don't exist today. We are not able, the leaders of movements or very active activists are put in jail here also very easily now. So we can empathize more with what happened in Kurdistan. But we are at a different phase of the development, as we see it, because of the large masses of population that we have in our country. So I'm sure that we have things to share, because we have a lot of experiments in India where people have, because of the impact of development, where water resources have been depleted, where forest resources have been depleted, where agricultural biodiversity has been depleted. We have communities that have revived many of these systems of water collection, of seed collection and biodiversity, multiplying biodiversity, and the regreening of forests. We have a lot of movements of that kind, and some of those experiments are very impressive. And I think that's what we can share with Kurdish people. But what we have a lot to learn from the Kurdish people also, because of the way the feminist movement, or how people try to live that feminism in the communities. So, what I must say is that in India, we see now a lot of backlash on the feminist movement. And it's very difficult. Although we had a lot of gains in many fronts in the last 50 years, in the last uh, f- uh, 15 years, we can see a big backlash, because you have men organizing against women also. And so the spirit of what the feminine is, I think, is needs to be re-questioned. And I think from that point of view, mm, uh, it's not about man against woman. I think from the Indian philosophical point of view, um, the understanding is more about a divine feminine. It's not feminist. And I think that's something. There are groups of people in India who now try to revive that ancient spirituality of the divine feminine, which is there in both male and female, and which links us all through our through the through our biology, through the cells that mutate, through the air we breathe in and out. So if one goes more deeply into Indian philosophy, it's all there. It's only that it's been very badly translated over the years. It's been politicized over the years. And we see a very different reality today. So I think this idea of going back to the origins of understanding is very important. And there are some groups in India that are doing this more seriously these days.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing like the experience you also made doing your works. And then you also touched upon the topic a bit. Like Öcalan also bases his paradigm on grassroots democracy, on ecology, and on women's freedom. So I would like to ask you how you see the relation between these topics, especially the relation between the domination of humans over nature and of men over women. Like, how do you see these two topics connected?
Yeah, I think they are very connected, uh, because if you look at the paradigm of development today, it's very violent. And because the technology itself is so violent, and if you see the way it has evolved, um, who makes all the decisions of how this technology is to be used? That's not done in a democratic way. that's not done in a way where women are also included. So, with the result that the way we deal with nature is very violent, and and that cannot bring life. But if we are speaking about giving life, about sustaining life, about interacting in a living system, then we have to have a more non-violent and more feminine approach, life-giving approach to interacting with nature, because it's after all nature which gives the living resource to the humans. And if humans are then using it in a very violent way, then it's very destructive. So I think these tendencies of what is violence, it's not as if women cannot be violent. Of course, women can be violent too. But it's more of the way in which the caring of nature and the caring for others in society has for a long time been the role of women. And I think it's in this caring and nurturing way that we have to go forward. So, as against the more violent and competitive way and the extractive way we have on nature. So I think more and more, as I said a little earlier, it's just not about male against female, but it's a way in which we will be able to build, or what shall I say, to recreate this deep feminine and this deep life-giving force within humanity, where we respect nature, where we are one with nature. We cannot dominate nature, and I think that's the approach we have to use in the future to find a way forward. Would be the way I look at it.